Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, Professor Dershowitz.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. As you know, we are marking many historic events this year, from the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration to the 70th of Israel. And perhaps one of the most interesting events this month is the 40th anniversary of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat's courageous trip to Israel. This was a game changer in the history of our region because Sadat was the first Arab leader to break the cycle of wars between Israel and its neighbors. The Knesset has just held a special event commemorating Sadat's speech from the podium of Israel's parliament. And all of the speakers are stressing the importance of the 40 years of peace with Egypt that have withstood wars Israel has fought in Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip. Now, one of the speakers was member of Knesset Ksenia Svetlova from the Zionist Union, who serves on Israel's Committee for Foreign Affairs and Defense. So let's hear from her.
Well, good afternoon, Professor Dershowitz. This is a member of Knesset Ksenia Svetlova from the Zionist Union. What I would like to talk about is the state of relations between ourselves, Israel and Egypt. On Tuesday, I had the pleasure to participate in a very special event at the Knesset. It was dedicated to 40 years of visit of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to Israel and his historical speech at the Knesset. While it's obvious that our relations in military aspect are excellent, we are coordinating extremely well with the Egyptian forces now in Sinai in the battle against radical Islam. The other aspects are still underdeveloped, and it seems that they are deteriorating with every single day. I'm talking, of course, about diplomacy. I'm talking about civil society relations, trade, culture, you name it. If we will continue, to just disregard the deteriorating spheres of relations and that amount of Egyptians that are exposed to Israel and to the Israelis is extremely small, and it's getting narrower with every single day, then we will find out, to our demise, that also our relations in the military sphere will suffer as well. So, can we just disregard it? Can we allow it to happen? I believe not.
Well, it's a great question, but I'm not sure you'll be happy with my answer. The great question is how to improve relations with countries with which Israel has peace treaties, Egypt predominant among them, but Jordan as well, where relations are deteriorating. Even the status of diplomatic relations has been downgraded somewhat. I don't think you'll ever see perfect relations between Egypt, Jordan, and Israel until the Palestinian issue is resolved. I really do think that this is the time to make tremendous efforts, sacrifices, negotiation toward resolving the Palestinian issue in a way that guarantees Israel's absolute security. Once that is resolved, I see every possibility of Egypt becoming a much closer ally of the United States and Jordan becoming a much closer ally of Israel and Jordan becoming a much closer ally. But until the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is resolved, you'll always see tensions. You'll always see incomplete relations. You'll always see hatred between many people in Egypt. I was in Egypt not so long ago, and they were selling in bookstores Hitler's Mein Kampf. But things can turn around quickly. Let's never forget that we glorify Anwar Sadat, and he was a man who deserves glorification, but he began his professional life as a supporter of Nazism. And he also was the one who waged the immoral 1973 war, which killed so many young Israelis. So you need changing events to change people. And I do think that making some deal with the Palestinians, resolving the Palestinian issue, will promote tremendous increases in diplomatic, cultural, and other relationships between Israel and its Arab neighbors, now including, of course, the Gulf states as well. So this is the perfect time to make acceptable compromises, not to compromise security, but to sit down and make peace with difficult, very difficult peace partners.
Now, Professor, what do you think about the new Trump peace plan that we're hearing so much about, and the role of moderate Sunni countries when it comes to that?
Well, I think it's very important that moderate Sunni countries be included in efforts to bring about a peaceful resolution, to put pressure on the Palestinians to come to the negotiating table and to negotiate with no preconditions. Remember, the Israeli position is clear. Israel is always open to negotiations with no preconditions and no predetermined outcome. I don't know, obviously, the contours of any plan that's being proposed. All I know, because I've met with some of the people involved, is that there's a tremendous amount of good faith effort going into trying to come up with proposals that will put the parties, that is Israel and the Palestinians, in a position to negotiate a reasonable resolution. In the end, the United States will not impose a resolution on either party, but it will facilitate, if it can, negotiations that could lead to such a resolution. Look, I think the time is better today, and the personnel are better today than it was during the Obama administration. So I have moderate optimism and encouragement that something may happen in the next few years.
Now, Professor, as a student of history, I'm sure you've heard it, that's saying that sometimes events make the man or woman, and sometimes the man or woman make the event. How would you categorize Sadat and Begin's bold move?
Well, first of all, I don't think Jimmy Carter deserves very much credit. He got the Nobel Peace Prize. I think he was simply somebody who helped facilitate. But I do think it was both Begin and Anwar Sadat who deserved the credit. And people were shocked when Begin became the guy. When Begin was elected, everybody said, "Oh my God, that's the end of peace. We need labor in there to make peace." And of course, labor did offer peace years later through Ehud Barak and then of course Likud through Ehud Olmert. So I do think that it takes courage. Look, Arafat refused to accept the generous offer in 2001 because Jimmy Carter told him he'd be killed if he accepted the offer. Anwar Sadat knew he had a chance of being killed, and he was killed. That took enormous amount of courage. Begin took enormous political risks. Look, he could have been killed too, the way Rabin was killed. And so it takes courage to make peace, and it takes risking one's life to save the lives of so many other people.
Now, interestingly, one important issue which was not on the program was a very hard question raised by Benny Vedal. We know you like hard questions, so we thought we'd bring this question to you for your reaction.
Professor Dershowitz, shalom. My Ben is Ben Vidal. I was kicked out of Egypt when I was 9 years old with all my family, my parents, and we lost everything in Cairo, Egypt. Like me, you have at least half the population of Israel, descendants of refugees from Arab lands. The Arab lands are clean from Jews now. So what is your opinion? Here we had today in 40 years of the visit of Anwar Sadat in the Israeli Knesset. And no one here in the panel mentioned the Jewish refugees from Arab land. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I agree with you 100%. I think that the so-called Palestinian refugee problem can be solved only if we treat it in tandem with the Jewish refugee problem from Arab countries. At least as many Jews were expelled, forcibly expelled, threatened, having no choice during the post-1948 period. And I think there has to be mutual compensation. And perhaps the answer is to have the Arab countries that expelled the Jews use the Jewish wealth to compensate the Palestinians. Also, of course, every Jew should have the option of compensation or return. I don't think any Jews will accept the option of return because these countries have become Judenrein. And it's very difficult for a Jew today to go back to areas where their ancestors lived for 3,000 years. And the world ignores this kind of ethnic cleansing that really did go on between 1948 forward. And so I think the world has to pay very close attention. I've spoken about this issue at the United Nations. I've spoken about this issue on college campuses. I completely agree that these countries owe their Jewish populations an enormous amount, especially since the Jews contributed so much to the economic, cultural successes of the countries that they lived in for so many thousands of years.
All right, well, Professor, we'd like to change gears now and introduce another person who helped change the course of Israel's history. With us in the studio today is Micha Eshet, who served as a paratrooper in the IDF during the Six-Day War. Micha doesn't sit around telling war stories, but he's deeply engaged in yet another battle that is happening right here in the same city that he helped liberate in 1967, Jerusalem. Micha, thank you so much for coming in today. So what are you fighting for today?
Today, basically, we are fighting for the implementation of the Kotel Bill, or basically also the advisory for praying arrangements by the committee, special committee, that the Prime Minister nominated, and that later was frozen in July of 1917. And our purpose is that the government will implement and try and make the Kotel a real national, historical, respectful place for all people of all kind of beliefs, Jews, of course, women and men in equality, and for each and every community to pray its own way.
Very interesting. Now, I find it interesting that you yourself are not religious, along with most...
I'm not.
Yes, right, along with most of your comrades who, and you clearly aren't women, right? Yet you're fighting with the same passion as you did when you liberated the Holy City. What is motivating you about this specific issue?
I think there are two things. First time I encountered the situation of the Kotel was about 26 years ago, when my mid-son was 13 years old, and for the bar mitzvah, we went to the Kotel as a traditional, for the traditional prayer of bar mitzvah. His mother, my wife, and his grandmother are Orthodox Jews, both from America. My wife made Aliyah to Israel, and we were both very surprised, all of us very surprised, that we couldn't do it together. We men were enabled to go into the praying court, and the women had to stand on chairs beyond the fences. And that was kind of a hit in my face.
Right, I mean, after having liberated the city and then to kind of have...
I'm not quite sure whether it's connected, but obviously, as one who was among the liberators of Jerusalem, we have a special feeling for the Kotel.
So what do you think needs to happen?
What needs to happen is that for the government to implement its decision.
Okay.
Once they do it, it was a compromise after many, many years of negotiation, which was led by the government, by the secretary of the government, by Nathan Sharansky, by, I don't remember the other name, and they came to a compromise agreement with all the Jews, both from Israel and the Reform and Conservative from America. They presented this proposition to the government accepted it, and then, again, in July, they've frozen it.
So, Professor, I'd like to hear your response to what our guest here is saying. I mean, we've discussed this issue in the past on the show, but it's been quite some time, and it doesn't feel like anything's changing.
Look, when the wall was liberated, there were so many possibilities. One, it could have been made a national monument and not a place of prayer, a place where people from all over the world could come, men and women alike. That was not what happened. A rabbi was appointed the Kotel, an Orthodox rabbi, and the entire functioning Kotel was turned into an Orthodox synagogue. That is now the reality on the ground, and so I think we can't go back to what could have happened in 1967. That's why I think the compromise is appropriate. Keep the central part of the Kotel the way it is as an Orthodox synagogue. Look, we all have this problem. I myself go and daven in an Orthodox synagogue in New York, Park East. My wife prefers to sit with me, so she has me go to a conservative synagogue with her where we can sit together. In America, of course, we have choices. We're not obligated by any government decisions. I do think there ought to be a place at the Kotel for mixed prayer where men and women can pray together. There ought to be a section for no prayer at all, where people can just go and recognize the national importance of the Kotel as part of the retaining wall of the Second Temple. So compromise is essential, and compromise is essential domestically as well as internationally. And I completely support the compromise. I was very gratified when Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to the GA in the United States by video and assured us essentially that this issue would be resolved in a way that satisfies the non-Orthodox community in the United States. We have to remember that both in Israel and the United States, non-Orthodox Jews are a very, very significant majority of the Jewish population. Also, American Jews have to maintain a stake in Israel, and you just can't offend 4/5 of the American Jewish population by regarding them as second-class citizens, not only when it comes to the Kotel, but when it comes to conversion, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to all kinds of other issues that transcend Israel and go to the heart of the Jewish community, what it means to be a Jew.
All right. Do you have a response to that, Micha?
Yes, I would like to comment in addition to what Professor Dershowitz said, that if I can make the differentiation between a house and a home, I do believe that the state of Israel is also the Jewish home for all of the Jewish nation all over the world. And like he said, we also have to make the Kotel as part of the national symbol of Israel and the Jewish tradition, not necessarily religious, but tradition, as a comfortable place for all people, for all the Jews. And hopefully the government will move to that direction.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Micha. We're turning to our next video. Our next video comes from yet another fan, Robert Resnick from Brooklyn, New York. He has been following you, Professor, since you worked on the program called The Advocates 45 years ago. So let's hear what he has to say.
Dershowitz. My name is Robert Resnick from Brooklyn, New York. In 1972, I watched you on The Advocates when you argued on behalf of George McGovern for president. You did a fantastic job and outdid your opponent, John Marshall, who advocated on behalf of Richard Nixon. I was also impressed by your humor, such as when you came in with a shopping cart full of groceries to point out to a witness on the opposite side that food prices have gone up. In subsequent weeks, when the show's moderator, Michael Dukakis, read the Advocate's poll, McGovern scored far better than Nixon. Within a year, the Yom Kippur War broke out, and Nixon ended up saving Israel by providing the necessary supplies. I am actually grateful that although I was old enough to vote in the Advocate's poll, and although the voting age had already been reduced from 21 to 18, I was still in high school and too young to vote. So my question to you, Professor Dershowitz, is, knowing everything that you know today, would you still have supported McGovern over Nixon? Thank you.
It's a very good question, and it goes back to 1972, as you say. In 1970, I was actually the advocate for Israel in a two-part show about Israel versus the Arabs in those days. The Palestinians really were hardly mentioned. And of course, I met Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was on the Advocates at about that same period of time. Look, I don't vote only in regard to Israel. I vote in regard to what's best for the world, what's best for America. It's very hard for me to cast a vote for Republicans who don't support a woman's right to choose, who don't support gay marriage. Richard Nixon, in addition to supporting Israel, was an anti-Semite, a personal anti-Semite. I think I would still vote for George McGovern. I would hope that George McGovern would have supplied Israel with weapons earlier. Remember, too, that it was the Nixon administration through Kissinger that warned Israel not to take preemptive action in 1973, action that could have saved 6,000 lives, perhaps. So it's very hard to go back in time in history. Today, it's much easier for Jewish supporters of Israel to oppose the Democratic Party because there's a wing within the Democratic Party that's very anti-Israel. They call themselves the Progressive Coalition, but they are really the anti-Israel coalition. But as far as I know, George McGovern was a strong supporter of Israel. That was before the time when people on the hard left opposed Israel. So I would stick to my vote for a decent man, George McGovern, rather than anti-Semite, who at the very end of the '73 war was finally persuaded by Henry Kissinger to do the right thing in relation to Israel. Remember, it was the very end of his presidency. He was about to go down, and who knows what he would have done if he had been a strong president without any fear of impeachment. So it's very hard to go back in history, but I don't think I would, at this point, change my vote. I would change a few votes. I would certainly change my vote for Jimmy Carter, and would have voted, if I could take it back, for Ronald Reagan. And I'm still somewhat up in the air about Obama's second election with Romney. I think Obama's second term in office has been a disaster, a continuing disaster for America. The Iran deal, giving up Syria, making an opening for the Russians. President Obama has been about the worst foreign policy president in modern history during his second term, but he was a great domestic president. Life's complicated, and who you vote for is complicated.
Very true. All right. Well, Professor, our final question comes from a member of your favorite audience. Shaked Soudri is a student who is privileged to meet with you and ask you an important question in person. Let's hear from her.
Hi, I'm Shaked Soudri from Israel. I'm visiting New York with my father, and I'm about to ask Professor Dershowitz for advice. How should I choose a career?
So some people will tell you, do what you do best. They should do for a living what you do best. I'm going to tell you something different. You have to get up every single day loving what you do at work. Never say, thank God it's Friday. Say, thank God it's Monday. You have to be so anxious to get up every morning and work, because work becomes the dominant part of your life. It's not the only part. You want to have family, you want to have friends. Work's very important. And so pick something that you love. It may not be the thing you're best at. If I wanted to pick something I loved, of course, I'd be the point guard for the Boston Celtics, but I'm not good enough to do that. So you have to pick something that you're good at, but it doesn't have to be the thing you're absolutely the best at. I'll tell you a story about it. So I had a student who had been an engineering student at MIT and worked as an engineer, and then he went to law school. And everybody said, wow, you'd be a great patent lawyer because you're an engineer. So he went and became a patent lawyer. He hated it. And then he realized, why did he drop out of engineering school? Because he didn't like engineering, so why would he like being a patent lawyer? So he became a civil rights lawyer. He may not have been as good at it, but he loved it. So you have to pick something to do as your work that you just love with a passion.
That's absolutely true. Do you love what you're doing still, Professor?
Oh, I get up every morning. I know it's going to be an exciting day. Somebody is going to attack Israel, and I'm going to have to defend it. Somebody is going to attack the Constitution. I'm going to have to defend it. Every day is unpredictable, but every day is an adventure. Look, I'm 79 years old. God has blessed me with relatively good health and vigor and strength, and every day is an exciting day for me. If I'm not involved in a case or a controversy, I'm writing a book. I'm writing two books now. One, The Case Against BDS, which will be out in a month, and second, a memoir of defending Israel over 70 years, from 1948 to 2018, and how different it's been defending Israel over really 7 long decades, where Israel has changed, America has changed, the world has changed, attitudes toward Israel have changed. It's been a 70-year adventure, and I'm writing about it.
Well, I think I have a good question for you for our next show in that case. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. That's unfortunately all the time that we have for today. And
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Oh, happy Thanksgiving. That's true. How could we forget? Here in Israel, you almost forget. So we have you to remind us, Professor Dershowitz.
Be the first to wish my Christian viewers a Merry Christmas. I'm one of these Jews who loves wishing people a Merry Christmas. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't think we're trying to steal Christmas. So for our Christian viewers, for our viewers of mixed background, Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, you're going to have another chance to say Merry Christmas, because we still have some time to get all those holiday gifts in, right? All right. We'd also like to thank our guest, Micha Eshet, as well, for joining us. If you would like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to ILTV or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.